What's up you guys, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel. Today I'm going to be showcasing you my take in deck profile for the Hexaorb Sorceress after the release of Brush with Legends. Now Hexaorb Sorceress is a card that, as you guys know from my last video on her, is one that I've been really looking forward to and wanting to see for this set. I've talked about all the amazing support that she's got, all the new cards that are going to make the deck a lot stronger, faster, and more consistent. And to be honest, the deck did really well and better than I thought it ever could. With the introduction of the new support for the deck is really performing really well. I'm having a lot of fun with it. It still needs a little bit of, stuff here and there, but hopefully, like I said in my last video, that in the next set, we're gonna get all those cards that we need to make this deck a tier 1 deck. I will say that out of all the other decks I've been playtesting, Hexaorb has definitely been the most fun, as she really does, mess with your opponent with the whole deck manipulation thing. Being able to choose when I can see my over trigger any period in the game is really awesome. It's really fun. Being able to just, manipulate the deck and then get all the benefits of just every deck that United Sanctuary just had before in just one deck is really amazing. As far as my matchups against other decks, nothing has been really too much of a problem. Magnolia still gives this deck a really hard time. Nirvana is really powerful right now, so it gives the deck a little bit of a hard time, but over time, I've just been playtesting and keep practicing and just finding out how to make the deck better. And this is currently the build that I've settled on until that happens. Without further ado, you guys, I'm gonna go ahead and showcase this deck profile to you now. All right, you guys, so I have the new Referzos Matt joining us for this deck profile. To get started off, I'm gonna showcase the Ride deck first, which is these 4 cards here. Diaglass Sorceress as my starter, Tier Square Sorceress for my grade 1, and Pentagleam Sorceress for my grade 2. And Hexaorb for the grade 3. Now this ride lineup is the best ride lineup from my experience that I really do enjoy playing. It's consistent, it helps you set up for Hexaorb Sorceress. There's not too much drawback from not playing this ride lineup, and it's still very consistent with what the deck wants to do. I am aware that there is a new ride lineup with Hexaorb Sorceress, which plays the Blaster ride lineup with Full Bow, Javelin, and Blaster Dark. That ride lineup is also really good. There's nothing wrong with that. I just personally kept this ride lineup the way it is because I enjoy that Pentagleam Sorceress can allow you to set up really well into your Hexaorb Sorceress turns. And with the additional support that we have for the deck, that's something that I enjoy playing because I like the style of Hexaorb Sorceress where over time we can just set up cards to confuse our opponent or throw our opponent off. And Tier Square Sorceress being my grade 1 card that lets me draw into another card is really helpful as well, because in most games, most people were not going to damage deny me from getting that extra card draw. Now, if we get into a point in Vanguard where people are going to become more creative or Hexaorb Sorceress gets really good support and then damage denying is more of a prevalent strategy, then I will switch over to that ride lineup, because at least this way from grade 1 to 2, they're gonna have to give you 1 point of damage so that this way you can activate your skills later. But for right now, I'm just gonna keep this ride lineup with Hexaorb. Moving on to the main deck, I play 4 copies of Hexaorb Sorceress. Hexaorb Sorceress is the star of the deck. She's still a really amazing card, having the ability to double any trigger effect that you get and being able to recycle your trigger effects back into the deck and get an additional drive for your Persona Ride turns is really amazing. As I stated prior in my old Hexaorb video talking about what will make this card potentially top tier in the future and the 3rd wave of support, is that Hexaorb Sorceress being able to double the effect of triggers and having cards now that we can play in the main deck that assist the power-upping of triggers means that your triggers will become more prevalent into the deck, and then getting a form of recycling triggers back into the deck, not the over trigger, but if you could, that'd be really amazing, will just make this deck better. You can survive most games up to turn 4. It's not like that's not something that's not impossible to do, and then because of the deck manipulation in the deck, you can choose when you want to see your triggers and choose to get another Hexaorb Sorceress. So Persona Riding in this deck is not some sort of difficult feat as people make it to be. Persona Riding is actually very simple to get to, and when you do get to it, it's actually very scary because with the introduction of the newest cards for Keter Sanctuary, the deck really did get an offensive power-up. As well as with Hexaorb's own support, the deck is now a lot more consistent in seeing triggers that this way your attacks are a lot larger than what your opponent can deal with. Hexaorb Sorceress still keeping up strong, and I do want to see this card succeed. For my next grade 3, I play 3 copies of Knights of War Damage Fasado. Prison, Eugene, and Cardinal DS Orphis. All those decks got really, Nirvana as well, Virena if you want to call it that. All of those decks got really good board removal support, and having a card that is a pressure card that applies really good resource management and advantage, as well as not being able to be chosen by your opponent's card effects, is actually really prevalent. The Prison decks, they can't get rid of this card, and even if they give it to them from your hand by them using their New Order card or part of their ride chain with Rosette to make you pick a card from your hand and put it into their prison, you can simply just call that card back, and then you have a card in the field that they have to attack with one of their cards to get rid of. The decks, most decks right now are still only doing about 3 to 4 attacks in a turn anyway, so forcing your opponent to give one of those attacks to really get rid of this card is actually really helpful in the long term for your defensive strategy. Fasado is still one of the best pressure cards and resource management cards that Keter Sanctuary has, and I really do like playing it at 3. For my next grade 3, I play 3 copies of Divine Sister Lepisto. Divine Sister Lepisto has been a really big card for the Hexaorb deck since it came out. She's still really relevant to the deck. It's what allows you to have 4 attacks in a turn. She is really not as much of a burden on your counterblast as she was before, as with the introduction of Hexaorb's support card as well as Fasado, getting that resource back isn't something that I really have to fight over. And there is something I want to talk about with the introduction of the next card that I'm going to show about resource management that really makes this card a lot more playable into the deck. I will say that I am having a hard time just picking the ratio that I want to run her at. I see some decks play 4, I see some decks play 2, I see some decks only play 1. I think that right now I'm only playing 3 because all the grade 3s that I have in my deck right now, I really do enjoy, and they're all really handy when you get to use them, and you always get to use them. And finally, for my last grade 3, it is Octodevote Sorceress. Now, Octodevote Sorceress, I talked about her in my Hexaorb will be top tier next set video a while ago, and this card is as amazing as I thought it was back then. This card is just really good with the resource management. It gives you counter charge, it gives you soul charge, yes, during the battle phase, but since we still play Lepisto, that actually is really handy because you can leave one counterblast open and then use Octodevote Sorceress as your 3rd attack, and then when you go, not your 3rd attack, but you can play around with Octodevote Sorceress, and whatever resource you need, she'll get it for you, but during the battle phase, because you're going to set up for next turn anyway. The retiring aspect of this card actually is not the problem that I thought it was, because since I do play a lot of grade 3s in the deck, her removing herself off the board just helps me make space for the next grade 3 that I want on the field when I go into my Persona Ride turn. So Octodevote Sorceress is still a really amazing card. She does everything that I thought she was going to do and affected the deck in a lot better of a way. The only reason why I don't max this card out is because I did want to watch out for how many grade 3s I was playing in the deck, because I still don't have as much defensive power in Hexaorb that I didn't have prior. The deck still is grade 3 heavy, and when you play a grade 3 heavy deck and you're not Bastion, then sometimes you do run into some defensive issues, but we'll talk about that later, as I did take care of that in the deck. Moving on to my grade 2, because I only play a playset of this one, it is Exquisite Knight Olwen. Exquisite Knight Olwen is one of the cards that I talked about in the prior video of Hexaorb, and he is also another card that I thought was just as amazing as he was prior. His on-place ability is actually really amazing. It helps me set up for my next turn with my Pentagleam plays. It also helps me set up for my Hexaorb Sorceress plays on my Persona Ride turn. The plus 10,000 power is actually really helpful because you can play around with your numbers, and with Octodevote Sorceress being active during the battle phase, I can determine on what it is that I want to be able to do with my counterblast and who I want to give the power up to. And messing around with your numbers so much during the battle phase can really throw off your opponent's guard, and that is something that I really did not expect this deck to really take advantage of, is the fact that your numbers fluctuate so much during the battle phase that your opponent has to really be picky with what they want to guard with, because they're not going to have all the defensive cards to stop all of your attacks with. And since this deck now plays the better front trigger, and we also are just keeping it with our 8 crit and front, that means that all of your cards on the board, on top of the Hexaorb bonus, I almost forgot, all of your cards on the board, their powers are always going to go up by 10,000 and more. which means that your opponent is always forced to guard with at least 20,000 per attack, and it could potentially mess with their defensive plays as well, because you have to factor in the boost and other effects that are going to power up your cards. For my first grade 1, I played 3 copies of Painkiller Angel. Painkiller Angel is the flex slot of the deck. This card honestly is a card that I do not like. It essentially is a drop and draw, is what this card does, because you're gonna call this card out, boost with it, retire at the end of the battle, and then draw a card. And I would rather be playing the promo card that it's a grade 1 promo card for Keter Sanctuary, where you counterblast 1 and you pick something from your damage zone and you guard with it and put the top card of your deck into the damage zone. I'd rather be playing that instead, add more to the defensiveness of the deck, but this card essentially just helps me dig through my deck faster and makes it so that you're playing a 43 card deck, because that's really what this card does. Helps you draw through your cards, find your key pieces, and go through your deck faster. For my next grade 1, I'm still playing 3 copies of Divine Sister Tartine. I really do like this card. It's an early game card that helps you set up for your plays. You can get cards any period that you want on your grade 1 turn, on your grade 2 turn, on your first Hexaorb turn, your Persona by Hexaorb turn. This card is always useful, and I'm glad that it is a card that can be used during any phase of the game, which is why I'm still playing this card. And for my next grade 1, this MVP of the deck and the most important card, it is 4 copies of Diaglass Sorceress. Now, I talked about how amazing this card would be for Hexaorb in my Hexaorb video, and she lived up and went beyond expectations. This card is so helpful in the early game, helping you set up, helping you get those key pieces, helping you build a board, helping you deck manipulate. This card does everything that this deck needed to do, and it even helps with the resource management even better, because this is that one counterblast you'll go to for your only main phase that you actually even use besides Hexaorb on your grade 3 turn. And the fact that she's also grade 1 means that she's a booster, and you can max her out because you play a lot of grade 3s in the deck. You want to make sure that they have boosters. Being able to also keep all the cards that you call standing compared to some of the other support cards that Keter Sanctuary got is really helpful as well, as it just means that we don't have to expel that many resources from our hand as we did before to generate a really good board to make sure that Hexaorb is giving all of her power-ups to really good targets. Diaglass Sorceress is really the MVP of this deck. You need to play 4 copies of this card. It is an engine card that makes the deck so much better. You cannot play Hexaorb Sorceress without playing 4 of this. And then finally for my grade 1s, I'm playing 4 copies of Aegismare Dragon. This is the grade 1 Sentinel for Keter Sanctuary. It gets better over time when you have less cards in your hand. Nothing much else to say about this card. And now moving on to our triggers. So I play 1 copy of Light Dragon Deity of Honors, Amartinoa, for my overtrigger. This is the only overtrigger that Keter Sanctuary has. It'd be completely absurd not to play this card. The deck plays a lot more grade 3, so you can definitely take advantage of this card even better. And it does help going through your deck faster. Hexaorb Sorceress ability is always active when you have this ability, which makes it really, really amazing, because the more triggers you pull over time with the overtrigger while you have the other grade 3s in play on top of Lepisto, you can just make some really, really fat and absurd columns that your opponent just can't guard through, because as you're getting more triggers over time, you just keep stacking the 1 trigger effect, Hexaorb, the 1 trigger effect, Hexaorb, on top of the million you get from this card. It's really absurd, and Hexaorb Sorceress can really take advantage of this card a lot better than it used to before. And then because of all the deck manipulation as well, you can honestly choose when you want to play this card. For the rest of my triggers, I'm playing 7 criticals. I played 3 copies of Knights of Heavenly Hammer Gurgant. I played 4 copies of White Fang Witch Disma. And then I play 4 copies of Bard of Heavenly Song Alpacc. And then last but not least, I play 4 copies of Circuling Sorceress as my heal trigger for the deck. Alright you guys, so that is it for today's deck profile. Thank you so much for watching and staying tuned with me throughout the entire video. If you enjoyed this deck profile, please make sure to give a thumbs up. It really does help the channel. Do not forget to subscribe, comment, and share this video with any of your friends who are thinking about building a Hexaorb deck profile. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you guys are subscribed to my daily post and get notified about them when they come out. I know that I've been a little slow on them lately. That's because I am in the middle of moving, and my birthday is next week, Thursday, at the time of making this video, August 5th, Leo season. And And tell me what your thoughts are on the new Hexaorb. How have you been enjoying it playing it? Do you enjoy my variation of the deck? What are your thoughts and changes I can do to make the deck better? I really do like where Hexaorb Sorceress is going. I've already stated this before in my previous video. The deck has a lot of really good synergy. Everything floats really well with this deck. The only issue I have with this deck now that is a little bit strange is the fact that this deck does not shuffle. I know it sounds weird, but the best way to put it is that not being able to shuffle a deck that can manipulate where cards go throughout the deck means that you have to be able to consistently go through your deck faster since you make up for all the cards that you're putting on the bottom of the deck with your abilities. Otherwise, you just have to play around the fact that you're getting cards that you may not want to see so early and play around them when you get them now because you know that you're not going to see those cards later in the game unless you start going through your deck really fast, which unfortunately this deck cannot do because of the lack of resource management that we still have. Well, that's it for today, guys. Peace.